Welcome. I'm Erin Roberts-McCarthy, and today I'll be teaching you how to use OpenFDA to identify adverse events. Today, we're going to be looking at the definition of pharmacoinformatics, some data sources you can use in public health, an overview of what OpenFDA is, the types of data it has available, a demonstration of OpenFDA, the importance of cleaning your data, a published example using OpenFDA, and finally, my references will be at the end. Pharmacoinformatics is the marriage of science and information technology in the use and analysis of healthcare and related data. The goal is to use technology to improve our patients' lives. Topics in the field range from molecular biology and drug development all the way through to post-market pharmacovigilance. Today, we will explore how pharmacoinformatics is used in pharmacovigilance. There are many different types of healthcare data, including molecular libraries like Chembl, adverse event reporting databases like VAERS and FAERS provided by the FDA, claims data such as payers and claims clearinghouses like Inovalon, electronic health records or EHR, and a whole lot more. Today I will demonstrate how to utilize OpenFDA to pull adverse event data on medications using the API provided at OpenFDA.gov. OpenFDA was first created in 2013 by Chief Health Information Officer Taha Kass-Hout. The project provides open APIs, raw data downloads, documentation, and a developer community aimed at transparency in its data resources. There are multiple API categories that you can select from on the OpenFDA website. You have animal and veterinary endpoints, drug endpoints, which are for human drugs, devices, food, other endpoints, and tobacco endpoints. In this video, I'm going to be focusing on the drug endpoints for humans. This includes adverse events, product labeling, national drug codes, recall information on drugs, and other details related to FDA-approved drugs, like their dosages, limited patient information, such as sex and age, and for a complete data dictionary, you can visit the OpenFDA's website.
Here we have the OpenFDA.gov site. You'll notice that there are a lot of data tabs up here. Today, we're just going to focus on APIs. And let's start going right into drug endpoints. We're going to be working with adverse events today. So we'll go ahead and click within adverse events. And the first thing we're going to do is explore a little bit on what this web page looks like. Here we have the drug adverse event overview page. Here you'll find information such as the source of the data, which is FAERS, as we discussed earlier. This is an adverse event reporting system provided by the FDA. It'll show you any changes that have made to the source data, the time period covered in the data, frequency of updates, and a little visualization here, which is not especially useful in its current format, but that's okay because we're going to be digging into the actual API. So to do that, let's look at what an API actually looks like. So in order to make a simple API call, you're going to have several parts to your URL. The first is going to be the base endpoint, which you'll notice refers to the API of the FDA.gov. And it tells us that we're going to be within drugs and looking specifically at events. Everything will be outputted in a JSON format, which we'll deal with later. And then in order to search the API, we're going to need to do search equals. We're going to have some sort of field and some sort of term that we're searching for. And then any limit on the amount of data. The limit is going to give us the number of records that we're pulling back in. So let's look at an example here. We'll start with the most basic example they give us on the website. Here we have a data pull looking for all records with the receive date between January 1st, 2004 and December 1st, 2008. We're only going to look at one record, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at this query. We'll copy it here for later, and we'll go ahead and hit run. Now, this is what I mean when I said a JSON format. This is not especially useful for querying data. So if you wanted to pull something like this into SAS, it's very difficult in its current format. So what we're going to go ahead and do is open up Excel. We'll go to Data, and then Get or Transform Data from the web. Here we're going to paste the URL that we copied earlier and hit OK. If you have a lot of records, this might take a moment, but since we're only pulling in one record, it's going to be fairly quick. So here you have the actual OpenFDA URL that we put in. Now we're going to go ahead and click on List. This is going to give us the list of records that we have pulled in. Notice that we only have one because we limited this to just one record. We're going to go ahead and select to table. What this is going to do is pull in that JSON format into a table that we can utilize in Excel. So let's go ahead and skip this. We don't have to worry about delimiters here. Now you notice this looks like it only has one column and one record. This is actually not entirely true. So if we hit the little arrows that are departing up here, we can look at all of the columns within this JSON file. So let's go ahead and select a couple that might be relevant to us. We'll hit the safety report ID, which is going to be the record ID. We'll look at how serious the actual report was, the receipt date. Let's look at some patient information as well. Great, so now we have 4 columns, but this patient record, you'll notice, actually doesn't tell us really anything useful. It still only says a record. So what we'll do here is click the outward arrows again, and you'll see that we have even more column names. So now let's go ahead and pick the patient's age, their sex, the reaction they had, and the actual drug they used. Also, we have some more columns now, and you'll notice these last 2 have even more opening up we can do. So we'll again click the outward arrows, expand to new rows, and then go ahead and click the reaction. This will tell us that on this record, the patient had 2 different types of reaction. They had an administration error and an overdose, but we still don't know what the drug actually was. So we'll go over to patient drug, expand to new rows, and then again, we'll pull in some information about that drug. So let's do medicinal product, which will tell us what the actual drug was. Administration route, so how it was administered, orally, intravenously, etc. And then the drug indication, so what the disease was that they were using the medication for. So here we go. You'll notice now we don't have any more columns that we can expand. So this is going to be our final data set. Go ahead and close and load. Now you'll see we have information on the safety report ID that we pulled in. We have the date here, June 25th, 2008. Reaction they had was a drug administration error and an overdose. Here's the drug they overdosed on. This is a code for the route in which they overdosed. And the drug indication was that they were abusing this drug. So this is all very interesting. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get another example pulled in. This link will go ahead and query records between 2004 and 2008. And it will show us that we want to pull in drugs from the pharmacy class of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And we'll go ahead and just pull in 1. So let's open up Excel again. Go back to data. Pull from the web. Paste our URL. So notice that when we paste our URL, instead of spaces, we're going to have plus signs. And that the actual search query is in quotes. So this should look familiar to you now. We'll go ahead and click list. And again, we only have 1 record. So we'll convert it to a table. And we have 1 column or 1 record, but that's not all we want to see. So let's go ahead and expand this column. We'll pull in the report ID. Let's look at how serious it was, the receive date, and some patient information. Great. So we want some more information now about who the patient was and what drug they took specifically. We know it was a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, but not which one. So this particular record has information on patient sex, the reaction they had, and some drug information. Great, so we know that the patient was a female. Let's go ahead and pull in, expand to new rows here, and pull in some information about their reaction. So this is going to be your reaction information. So they had some renal impairment, which is pretty common for non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And let's pull in exactly which drug they used. So we'll look at medicinal product, drug indication. So they were using ibuprofen, and it looks like they were using it for an unknown indication. So here we go. This is everything. We can't expand to any more columns. Let's close and load. So like before, now we have one safety report ID. The patient had 2 different reactions here, and it was for ibuprofen for an unknown indication. So this is great. But what if you wanted to do a slightly more complicated query? Well, for that, I'm going to use Notepad to demonstrate how to put together a couple of different pieces of a query. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to limit the data to the first 6 months of 2024. So in order to do that, I have to make sure that I've got the receive date, a bracket, my start date, and remember we talked about plus signs being instead of a space. So I'm going to do 2004-01-01 to 2004-06-01. And again, and this is going to be a Boolean join. So I want to do these dates, and I want the country to be the US, because I don't want anything that is similar to the US, like perhaps the Ukraine. I want to limit this to exact. So I want only records where the country is exactly US. I also want that the patient drug indication, so what the patient was using the drug for, is exactly either migraines, migraine prophylaxis, vestibular migraines, or cluster headaches. In order to do that, I'm going to put plus signs in between every space, but in any group of words that should be categorized together, like migraine prophylaxis, I'm going to put those in quotes. I'm going to limit this to only 10 records so that we can get an idea of what pulling in more records looks like. So let me go ahead and copy this. And let's go ahead and see what the data look like on the web first in a JSON format. Great, so we know this is a valid link as it gave us some information here. But again, this information is not very useful in its current format. Let's go ahead and open Excel back up. Okay. Go to Data from Web and paste in the URL we just created. Now this might take a little bit longer to load because it's got 10 records. All right, here we are. So let's click List. And here's our 10 records, just like we told it to fetch. So let's go ahead and move to Table. There aren't any delimiters we have to worry about, so we'll click OK. And let's start expanding. So I want the safety report ID. Let's go ahead and make sure that the country is the United States, like I wanted here. We'll pull in some information on the seriousness. And say I wanted to look at whether or not the patient was hospitalized with the adverse event. So I'll click in hospitalization, the date, and then let's pull in some patient information. So here, this is really great. We can see that the only country that it pulled in was the US, like I told it to. We have some different categories of seriousness and some different hospitalization information. And we have the receive date. So now let's start expanding the patient column. I want the age of the patient. I want their sex, the reaction, and the actual drug they used. So this is great. Here are the ages reported. Here are the sexes reported. And now I just have to expand the patient's reaction and their drug. So let's expand to new rows. And pull out the exact reaction that the patient had. We'll also pull in some information about the drug. So here we're going to do medicinal product. The drug indication. You'll see why I'm going to do that in a moment. And then hit OK. Great, so nothing else can be expanded. Let's pull this into our table and take a look. Awesome, so there's a couple of things that I want you to note here. One is that we now have many records. There are several things I want you to note here. Primarily that we have many records per safety report ID. And this is because of a couple of reasons. One is that there were 2 different drug indications for this particular report, and the patient actually took 2 different drugs. So one was Aimovig for their migraine, and the other was oxycodone for pain, probably also related to their migraine. and different reaction types for each of the type of drug that we're utilizing. Another thing you'll see here is that even though we asked for only migraines, we'll see some records that have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And you'll notice that that is because the record also, somewhere on the record, has migraine present. So if we wanted to take care of this, what we could do is go back to our data. We'll import from the web. Now remember, this is the same data set. So we'll just go ahead and hit list. We still have 10 records. We'll pull it into a table. Still no delimiters. And let's start expanding our records here. So we'll pull in the same fields, pull in safety report ID, hospitalization, seriousness, the date that the report was received, and information on the patient. All right, we still only have 10 records. That's great. So we'll pull out some patient information. We'll pull out their age, their sex, the reaction they had, and the drug. And again, we still only have 10 records. Still right on track. So let's expand this to new rows to patient reaction. And we'll pull in the actual reaction here. So now you'll see we have more than 10 records. We've about tripled our record count, but not all of these are going to be reactions that we care about. For example, I don't particularly care about the reaction being a drug overdose by omission from device, or that the drug was effective or difficult to use. I care more about physiological reactions. So let's look at chromaturia, hematemesis, intestine perforation. Migraines for a migraine medication is always a possibility. Motion sickness, muscle spasms, comfort, pain in extremity, septic shock, that would be a big deal, right? Tinnitus. And that'll be about it in terms of our drugs. So now we're down to 13, which is great. And then let's look at some drug information. We'll expand to new rows, and this is where we've really blown up our record count. So we're going to have to do some real trimming here. Let's expand. We'll do medicinal product, and we'll do drug indication. And we've expanded yet again. So let's start doing some cleaning. Let's start with drug indication. Now, remember I asked for only things that had to do with migraines and cluster headaches, so I'll go ahead and select that the indication is only for migraine and cluster headaches. And that has automatically limited a lot of our reactions here. So let's look at where we might have some other duplication. This person had a migraine and a cluster headache, so that's okay. This person took the same drug, also again for migraine and a cluster headache. This person took some over-the-counter Advil and reported multiple different reactions. So we'll go ahead and keep them in as well. And so that looks good. We moved from having 10 rows, one for each record, to 18 rows, which is not unreasonable. And it looks like we only have things that are of desire to us. So let's go ahead and pull in the data. Great. So you'll see here we went from a total of 94 rows in our past data pool to 19 rows, including the header. And we can actually start doing some analysis with these data. One thing I want you to notice is the missingness in this data. All of these patients are missing their age, and all of these patients here are missing their sex. So this might be a problem in a study where we want to look at, for example, the breakout of hospitalizations by age and gender. So you've got a couple of different options here. One is that you can remove these records, which you can do either here in the end during your analysis in a program like SAS or Python, or you can do it in the beginning when we pulled in our data and limit the records to only those that have a patient sex and patient age available. Another thing you can do is bootstrapping, where you can take some methodology that you prefer. There's a lot of different ways to bootstrap that's outside of the scope of this presentation. But you could do, for example, take the average age of the group that you're looking at and impute that in here. Or you could take some sort of standard deviation and apply that. But you're going to want to have some way in mind before you start your analysis of how you're going to clean your data. Another thing you're going to want to do are sanity checks. So, for example, it is very unlikely that Advil liquid gels caused septic shock in this patient. Septic shock is an extreme reaction that is related to bacterial infection or some sort of infection in the blood. And it is, again, unlikely that over-the-counter Advil liquid gels caused that reaction. Given that the age and gender are missing, this is probably a self-reported reaction. So maybe you want to remove self-reported reactions entirely from your study.
Here is a great example of the use of OpenFDA found in PubMed. This is alopecia in multiple sclerosis patients treated with disease-modifying therapies. The authors utilized OpenFDA and FAERS to examine the distribution of age and sex of MS patients treated with disease-modifying therapies. Using data provided by OpenFDA and FAERS, the authors found that teriflunomide was disproportionately high compared to other drugs causing alopecia. Women reported 86% of alopecia among teriflunomide users, and younger people were more likely to report alopecia, particularly people in their 40s. Here are some references, including the definition of pharmacoinformatics and some reading on what informatics is, as well as the paper I just showed you. Finally, there is a link to OpenFDA.gov. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have questions, please reach out to your professor or visit the Stack Exchange link, which is provided by the OpenFDA to improve your querying abilities.